JSON.com. And if you like this video, don't forget to smash the like button and share this video with as many people as you can. And if you are not subscribed to my channel yet, kindly do it so that you don't miss any of my videos. So without any delay, let's get started. And today we are gonna do JavaScript. And in JavaScript we are gonna do JSON. So this is the JSON part 1. There will be two parts, part 1 and part 2. This is JSON part 1. So I'm very excited for this. Let's get started. Dad! Okay. Okay. So we are gonna do JSON intro, JSON syntax, JSON versus XML, JSON data types, JSON parse, JSON stringify, JSON objects, and JSON arrays in this video. And we would do JSON PHP, JSON HTML, and JSON JSONP in the next part. So let's get started. So JSON introduction. JSON. So what is the full form of JSON? JSON is JavaScript Object Notation. So it is JavaScript Object Notation. JSON is a syntax for storing and exchanging data. So it is a syntax for storing and exchanging data. So like you could send JSON data to a server and the server could return JSON data. And the server could understand JSON data by by decoding it using some methods, and JavaScript could understand it by using JSON.parse. And when JavaScript is sending it, it could use JSON.stringify to convert a JavaScript object into a JSON object to send it to the server. But if it receives a JSON data, JavaScript could use the JSON.parse method to convert JSON data into JavaScript object or array. So JSON is basically text. So it is text, and we can only exchange text with the server. Okay, written with JavaScript object notation. So the server can only send us text. Okay. So JSON is text written with JavaScript object notation. Okay. So exchanging data. When exchanging data between a browser and a server, the data can be only text. So when you are exchanging the data that you are exchanging can only be text. It cannot be any other thing. JSON is text. So JSON is text because any object we write in JSON, it is in quotes, and it is in single quotes, and any array also we write in JSON, it is in single quotes only. So JSON is text, and we can convert any JavaScript object into JSON and send JSON to the server. So we can convert any JavaScript object into JSON using the JSON.stringify method and send it to the server. We can also convert any JSON received from the server into JavaScript objects. So we can also convert any JSON that has come from the server into any JavaScript object using the JSON.parse method. This way we can work with the data as JavaScript objects with no complicated parsing and translations. So JSON is very easy. Compared to XML, it is very easy, and JSON is now widely used. Instead of XML, people prefer JSON now. Okay, so JSON is very useful. So sending data. If you have a data stored in a JavaScript object, so if you have some data stored in a JavaScript object, you can convert the object into JSON. So first you can convert the object into JSON using the JSON.stringify method and send it to the server. So like this. So like here you have an object, JavaScript object. This is just a normal JavaScript object. But now in variable myJSON we have a JSON object, because we are using the JSON.stringify on my object, and a new object is being created, and that is a JSON object, and it is being stored in myJSON. Then what we are doing window.location equals to demo.json.php. So we are opening the demo.json.php file, and then we are giving a query to it after the question mark, q equals to myJSON. So we are giving it the JSON data. So John from New York is 31. So this is coming from the server. This text is coming from the server to us. Okay. So this is how you can convert a JavaScript object into a JSON object. It is quite easy, right? You will learn more about the JSON.stringify function later in this tutorial. Receiving data. So if you receive some JSON data, then how can you convert it? If you receive data in JSON format, you can convert it into JavaScript object. So that is also like stringify, but you have to use another method of JSON, that is parse. Instead of stringify, if you have a JSON object, you can convert it into JavaScript object using parse. So like here, think that this JSON has come from a server, this JSON, and we have stored it in my JSON. Okay, and my JSON is this JSON object. Okay, and this is the JSON notation. See, we are giving the object in quotes, and the keys are also in the quotes. So the keys are also in the quotes in JSON, and they should be double quotes only. They can't be single quotes over here. Okay, so in my JSON we have a JSON object. So if you want to convert it into JavaScript, just create a new variable and then do JSON.parse my JSON. So this JSON.parse is creating a new object, a new JavaScript object, and we are saving that JavaScript object into my object. And then if we if we are doing document.getElementById demo.html equals to my object.name. So we are accessing the name property and showing its value in demo. So its value is John, so John is being shown. Okay, so you will learn more about the JSON.parse function later in this tutorial. So we would learn more about JSON.stringify also in this part only. Parse and stringify we are gonna do today only. Okay, so now we are on storing data. So when storing data, the data has to be a certain format. So the data has to be a certain format, and regardless of where you choose to store it, text is always one of the legal formats. So when you are storing data, the data has to be a certain format. So there are some formats that there are only some formats that you can keep when you are storing a data. And regardless of where you choose to store it, text is always a legal format. So you can store text anywhere you like. It is always a legal format. So JSON makes it possible to store JavaScript objects as text. So JSON makes it possible to store the JavaScript objects that we have as text. So storing data in local storage. So what we are doing in this, we are storing data. So like in this, what we are doing, we are creating a JavaScript object. Then we are creating a my JSON variable, and we are converting the JavaScript object into a JSON object. Then we are creating a test JSON, okay, in our local storage, and then we are its value would be my JSON. Okay, so now we have set it. So we have set this test JSON in our local storage. Now when we want to retrieve it, we can just retrieve it in a, like, we are creating a text variable, and in that we are bringing the local storage dot get item. So it is bringing the item test JSON. So it is bringing the item test JSON into text. So the JSON object would come. Then we are creating a obj, and we are parsing the JSON object that has come in text. Okay, so it is now a JavaScript object, and then we are accessing demo, and it's in a HTML we are setting to object.name. So object.name was John, so John would come. As simple as that. Okay, so you can, JSON makes it possible to store JavaScript objects in local storage. So what is basically JSON? So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Alright, JSON is a lightweight data interchange format. So JSON is lightweight data interchange format. JSON is self-describing and easy to understand. It is also self-describing and easy to understand. JSON is language independent. So it is language independent. So language independent, what it means, JSON can be used with any language, with PHP, with ASP, with JavaScript, and any language. Okay, and we are giving a star. So star JSON uses JavaScript syntax, but the JSON format is text only. So JSON uses the JavaScript syntax. So more or less the JSON is JavaScript syntax only. There is only a bit of difference, right? So but the JSON format is text only. But the JSON format is text only. Text can be read and used as data format by any programming language. Text can be read and used as a data format by any programming language. So yeah. JSON format was originally specified by Douglas Crockford. So it was originally specified by Douglas Crockford, and now it has become such a big thing, and everybody these days are using to like interchange data with the server. So everybody, like when they are creating social networking websites or any website and they want to interchange data, they are mostly using JSON. Okay, few of them are only using XML, but mostly they use JSON. So why should you use JSON? We have seen what is JSON, okay, and we have seen how to use it. But why should you use JSON? Why not XML? So since the JSON format is text only, it can easily be sent to and from a server. Okay. So it can easily be sent to and from a server and used as a data format by any programming language. So since the JSON format is text only, it can easily be sent to and from a server and used as a data format by any programming language. Okay, so JavaScript has a built-in function to convert a string written in JSON format into native JavaScript objects. What is that method? It is JSON.parse. So if you receive data from a server in JSON format, you can use it like any other JavaScript object. So using the JSON.parse, you can convert it into a JavaScript object, and then you can use it like any other JavaScript object. I have a question for you. If you have some data, okay, and you want to send it to a server, so like if you have an object and you want to send it to a server, how can you do it? Yes, you are right, it is the JSON.stringify method. Okay, so we will read about parse and stringify more in later chapters, but in this video only. So now we are on JSON syntax. We are just taking a 5-second break. Okay, I'll just see is there water over here. If there is, I'll just have a sip. Just a second, guys. I'm here only. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here only, guys. I'm just seeing if there's water here or not. Okay, there was water and I just drank it. So now we are on JSON syntax. So now let's see the JSON syntax. The JSON syntax is a subset of the JavaScript syntax. So it is a subset of the JavaScript syntax. So there are some JSON syntax rules. Let's see them. JSON syntax is derived from JavaScript object notation syntax. So it is derived from JavaScript object notation syntax. Data is in name value pairs. So the data is in name value pairs. Data is separated by commas. So the data is separated by commas. Curly braces hold objects. So the curly braces hold objects. Square brackets hold arrays. Square brackets hold arrays. So you see there are so many similarities with JavaScript in JSON. So like JavaScript also holds data in name value pairs, and JSON also. In JavaScript also data is separated by commas, and in JSON also. In JavaScript also curly braces hold objects, in JSON also, and in JavaScript also square brackets hold arrays, and in JSON also. So there are lots of similarities because it is JavaScript object notation. JSON data, a name and a value. So JSON data is written as a name value pairs. So it is written as name value pairs. A name value pair consists of a field name in double quotes. So it consists of a field name in double quotes followed by a colon followed by a value. Okay. So it consists, you can say the field name as key also, a key followed by a colon followed by a value. So this is the example. So this is the key, and in JavaScript you can write the key without these quotes, but in JSON it is necessary to give double quotes around the key. Okay, else it would not work. Then you have to give a colon, and then you have to give whatever value it is. JSON names require double quotes. JavaScript names don't. Okay. JSON evaluates to JavaScript objects. So it evaluates to JavaScript objects. Let's see what it is saying. The JSON format is almost identical to JavaScript objects. So it is almost identical to JavaScript objects. In JSON, keys must be string. So these keys must be strings. So they should be in double quotes, written with double quotes. Okay, so in JSON it is like this. In JavaScript, keys can be strings, numbers, or identifier names. Keys can be strings, numbers, or identifier names. So like it could, you don't need double quotes around it. Okay, or single quotes also. JSON values. So JSON values. In JSON, values must be one of the following data types. So in JSON, the values should be in one of the following data types. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be an object, a JSON object, it could be an array, it could be a boolean, it could be null. Okay. In JavaScript, values can be all of the above. So in JavaScript, values can be all of the above plus any other valid expression including a function. So a value could be a function also, it could be a date also, and it could be undefined also. In JSON, a function, a date, and undefined can't be there. But in JavaScript, a function, date, and undefined could be there. And with including all these, a string, a number, an object, an array, a boolean, a null. So in JSON, string values must be written with double quotes. So the string values must be written with double quotes. In JavaScript, you can write string values with double quotes or single quotes. So the values that you give, it should be in double quotes. It is not compulsory, like if you give a number, they don't need quotes, but it is just saying generally if it is a string, then it should be there in double quotes. But in JavaScript, whatever value you give, it can be in double quotes or it can be in single quotes also. But in JSON, it can't be in single quotes. The value can't be in single quotes. So JSON uses JavaScript syntax. So JSON uses JavaScript syntax. Because JSON syntax is derived from JavaScript object notation. So because it is derived from JavaScript object notation, very little extra software is needed to work with JSON within JavaScript. So because JSON syntax is derived from JavaScript object notation, very little extra software is needed to work with JSON within JavaScript. With JavaScript, you can create an object and assign data to it like this. So like here you create a variable person and then you can give it data like this. So like you give curly braces, then whatever the data you want to give. You can access a JavaScript object like this. So if you want the name property, you can access it like this. So give the object name and the property that you want to access. So its value would come. So here we are accessing John. So John is being printed. Okay. So you all know how to work with JavaScript objects. It can also be accessed like this. So it could also be accessed like this in bracket notation. This is dot notation, but it could also be accessed in bracket notation. Okay, so like this name, so it is the same thing but in a different notation. Data can be modified like this, so it can be modified like this, so like person dot name equals to Gilbert, any value. So you can change the data like this in JavaScript, you all know this. It can also be modified like this, so it could also be modified in bracket notation like this. Okay, so you will learn how to convert JavaScript objects into JSON later in this tutorial. You all know it, it is JSON.stringify. You use JSON.stringify. So JavaScript arrays as JSON. The same way JavaScript objects can be used as JSON, JavaScript arrays can also be used as JSON. So you will learn more about arrays as JSON later in this tutorial. JSON files. The file type for JSON is .json. So the file type of for JSON files is .json. So the MIME type for JSON text is application/JSON. So the MIME type for JSON text is application JSON. So let's see what is MIME on Google. If we get some information, let's see. If we don't, we will just leave it. MIME meaning full form. Multi-purpose internet mail extensions is an internet standard that extends the format of email messages to support text and character sets other than ASCII, as well as attachments of audio, video, images and application programs. Okay, so the full form is multi-purpose internet mail extensions, MIME. Okay, so the you could say MIME type for JSON text is application JSON/JSON, and we have completed this also. Let's take a short break of 5-10 seconds. JSON is very interesting, guys. I really find it very interesting. I'm very liking it. Okay, let's continue. So JSON versus XML. Both JSON and XML can be used to receive data from a web server. So both the JSON and XML can be used to receive data from a web server. The following JSON and XML examples both define an employees object with an array of 3 employees. So let's compare these. So in XML, if you wanted to do this, you first have to create an employees tag and then close it. Then you have to create one employee, and in that you have to give a first name and a last name. Then you have to create another employee and you have to give a first name and a last name. Then you have to create another employee and you have to give first name and a last name. And then you have to close all of these one by one. In JSON, it is so short. Just create an employees, okay? Just give an array, okay? And in that array, there would be objects. One object has first name, last name. Another object has first name, last name. And the third object has first name, last name. So these both are the same things, but you can directly see which is better. Yes, JSON is clearly better. Okay, JSON is 99.9% better than this. I would say 100% better than XML example. So JSON is like XML because both JSON and XML are self-describing, that are human readable. So both the JSON and XML are self-describing, human readable. So JSON is a bit like XML. Okay, so it is like XML. Both JSON and XML are hierarchical. Both of them are hierarchical. Values within values. So they can be values within values. So both of them are hierarchical. Both JSON and XML can be parsed and used by lots of programming languages. So both the JSON and XML can be parsed and used by lots of programming languages. Both JSON and XML can be fetched with an XML HTTP request. So both of them can be fetched with an XML HTTP request object. So JSON is unlike XML because JSON doesn't use end tag. So it does not use end tags. JSON is shorter, very shorter. You can see here we have given like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines code we are writing. So like in XML it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We are writing 11 line code in 5 line codes. In 5 lines we are writing a 11 line code. So that's quite cool. So JSON is very shorter. You can see that JSON is quicker and to read and write. So JSON is very quicker to read and write, unlike XML. JSON can use arrays. JSON can also use arrays, but XML can't. The biggest difference is that XML has to be parsed with an XML parser. So sorry guys. XML has to be parsed with a separate XML parser, but JSON can be parsed by a standard JavaScript function. So JSON can be parsed with a function, whereas XML has to be parsed with a complete XML parser. Okay, so JSON is very quicker compared to XML and very shorter and all. Why JSON is better than XML? Why it is better than XML? You have seen the differences in it, but why is it better? XML is much more difficult to parse than JSON. So XML is much more difficult to parse than JSON. JSON is parsed into ready-to-use JavaScript object. JSON is parsed into ready-to-use JavaScript object. So XML is much more difficult to parse than JSON. So it is much more difficult. Instead of an XML parser, instead of a JSON parser, you don't need any JSON parser. You can just use a JavaScript function to parse JSON data. For Ajax applications, JSON is faster and easier than XML. So JSON is faster and easier than XML. Using XML, first you have to fetch an XML document, then you will have to use the XML DOM to loop through the document, and then you would have to extract values and store it in variables. Whereas in JSON, you can fetch a JSON string and then just parse it. Okay, and it is done. Okay, so I 100% prefer JSON. And we are just taking a short break. Oh. I'm loving this. Oh, just a second, guys. Need a good stretch. We just have 5 chapters left. Data types, bars, stringify, objects, arrays, and we are done. And that is quite cool because only 5 chapters. I could not say only, but yeah, it is quite. JSON is very easy and good, very faster, very good, very cool, the best. JSON is the best. So JSON data types, valid data types. So in JSON, values must be one of the following data types. So in JSON, the values must be one of the following data types. It could be a string, a number, an object, an array, a boolean, or null. JSON values cannot be one of the following data types. So JSON values cannot be one of the following data types. They cannot be a function, they cannot be a date, and they cannot be undefined. Okay, so JSON strings. Strings in JSON must be written in double quotes. So the strings in JSON should be written in double quotes. JSON numbers. Numbers in JSON must be an integer or a floating point. like this, or it could be like a floating point also, like 30.2, 30.4, anything. JSON objects. Values in JSON can be objects. So in values in JSON can be objects also. So like this, and another object also. Objects as values in JSON. So objects as values in JSON must follow the same rules as JSON object. So this is following the same rule as JSON object. Like you are giving the key in double quotes, then you are giving the value also in double quotes, not in single quotes. Okay. JSON arrays. Values in JSON can be arrays also. So like this. Okay, but the values should be in double quotes. They cannot be in single quotes. JSON booleans. Values in JSON can be true or false. They can be true or false also. JSON null. Values in JSON can be null also. So they can be null also. This was very quick chapter. Very quick chapter. We just had like type a 2-minute chapter. Great guys, I'm just having starting to feel tired a bit. Played 3 matches today. Okay guys, let's continue. Okay. So JSON.parse. A common use of JSON is to exchange data to and from a web server. When receiving data from a web server, the data is always string. So when you are receiving data from a web server, it is always string. Parse the data with JSON.parse and the data becomes a JavaScript object. So if you parse the data with JSON.parse, it becomes a JavaScript object. As easy as that. Example, parsing JSON. Imagine we receive this text from a web server. So imagine we receive this text from a web server. Use the JavaScript function JSON.parse to convert text into JavaScript objects. So use JSON.parse to convert this text into JavaScript object. So make sure the text is written in JSON format, or else you will get a syntax error. So if it is not in JSON format, you will get a syntax error. Use the JavaScript object in your page. So now you can use the JavaScript object in your page. So like here you had a txt, and in this we had JSON text over here. Then we have an object and we are parsing this text, and then we are accessing the name, and then we are adding a comma using concatenation, and then we are adding the age. So John 30 is being printed, and we are like we are setting demos in an HTML to it. Okay, so like John 30 is being printed. Okay, JSON from the server. So now JSON from the server. You can request JSON from the server by using AJAX request. So you can request JSON from the server by using an AJAX request. As long as the response from the server is written in JSON format, you can parse the string into a JavaScript object. If it is not in JSON format, it cannot be parsed. Okay. So use the XML HTTP request object to get data from the server. So this is the file that we are using in this example. So like in this file, this is a JSON object. In this there is a name, John, age 31, and its pets is an array of objects. In that there is one object with animal dog, and its name is Fido. And then there is a cat, its name is Felix, and there is a hamster, its name is Lightning. So okay, so this was the file, and what we are now doing, we are creating a XML HTTP request object. Then we are opening the JSON demo.txt file using the get method and asynchronous is true. Then we are sending the request to the server. Whenever the ready state would be changed, we would go in this. We would check that if the request is finished and response is ready and it was all successful and the status is 200, then we would create a my object variable and we would parse the JSON object that we receive. Okay, then we are just accessing demo and we are setting its inner HTML to my object dot name. So John is coming as my object dot name because in this file that we had, you see it is name John. That's why John is coming. This is quite cool. Array as JSON. So now array as JSON. When using JSON.parse on a JSON derived from an array, the method will return a JavaScript array instead of a JavaScript object. So this is the file that we are using. It is an array, a JSON array for Ford, Audi, Fiat and BMW are in it. So now what we are doing, we are creating an XML HTTP request object. We are opening this file. Okay, we are sending the request to the server. Whenever the ready state is changing, we are going in this. Whenever the request is finished and response is ready, like we check it using this ready state is 4 and this status is 200. That means if it is successful, then it would go in this and it would create a my array and it would parse the JSON that has come. Okay, then it would access a demo and it's in a HTML. It would set to my array 0. My array 0 was Ford. 0th element was Ford. That's why Ford would come. So Ford is coming. Quite cool. Exceptions. Parsing dates. So now we are on exceptions. Parsing dates. Date objects are not allowed in JSON. So the date objects are not allowed in JSON. So dates are not allowed in JSON. If you need to include a date, write it as a string. So if you want to include a date, write it as a string. Okay. So you can convert it back into a date object later. So you can convert it back into a date object later. So like here you have a string into a date. So here you have a variable text and in this we have a JSON object and you are giving the date as a string over here. Okay, then you parse it, so you created a JavaScript object and then you are doing object.birth new date object.birth. So whatever the value of this birth has come, it has come in new date and we are setting object.birth as that new date and that new date is a proper date object. And then when we access we are accessing demo and we are setting its inner HTML to object.name plus a comma plus object.birth. So it is now converted into a proper date. But if we just remove this line and we commented this, it is that date only, but it is not a proper date object. Okay. Or you can use the second parameter of the JSON parse function called reviver. So you can use the second parameter of JSON parse function called reviver. Okay, so the reviver parameter is a function. So it is a function that checks each property before returning the value. So it checks each property before returning the value. So convert a string into a date using reviver function. Using the reviver function, you can convert the string into a date. So here you have a variable text, a JSON object. You are parsing it, and then you are giving a reviver. Okay. Okay, and in this there is a key and a value. Okay, so it would check if the key is birth. So if the key is birth, then it would return new date value. So it would return the new date and its value. Okay, so else it would return value. Else if it is not birth, then it would return the original value only. Okay, and then we are printing this. So this was also a way how we could do this thing. Okay, this is the same thing, but look, reviver function syntax is quite long and this is quite short. You could just directly can do it. So I more prefer this, but you could use the reviver. It is the same thing. So now we are on parsing functions. Functions are not allowed in JSON. Functions are also not allowed in JSON. If you need to include a function, write it as a string. So if you need a function, write it as a string. You can convert it back into a function later. Okay, like here you have a txt and in that you are giving age a function and you are writing the function as a string. So you are writing it as a string. Okay, and then you are creating a variable obj and you are parsing text. Okay, but now the function is still a string. So how can you convert it into a proper function? You are just setting object.age and in that you are using the eval function. Okay, so then you are giving opening brackets and quotes. Then you are concatenating object.age with it. Then you are concatenating the closing bracket. Okay, so this is the syntax how you could create a string. You could convert a string into a function using the eval function. So and then you are accessing a demo and you're setting it in HTML to object.name plus a comma plus object.age. So you're calling the age. Okay, so now it is a function, that's why it is being called and 30 is coming. So you should avoid using functions in JSON. Okay, so you should avoid using the functions in JSON. The function will lose their scope. So the function will lose their scope and you would have to use eval to convert them back into functions. So yeah, so there is no use also to give functions in JSON because like they would basically lose their scope, right? And in JavaScript we don't know that if the function would like there's no use of it. Okay, if you give it in JSON, right? So but you should know how to use the eval function to convert it back into a function. So browser support. The JSON.parse function is included in all major browsers and in the latest ECMA script JavaScript standard. The number in the table below specifies the first browser version that fully supports the JSON.parse function. Google Chrome, yes. Edge 8.0, Firefox 3.5, Safari 4.0 and Opera 10.0. For older browsers, a JavaScript library is available at this, so we don't need to check it out. Now we are on Stringify, so let's take a short break. Short break, 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 oh yeah, oh yeah. Short break, 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 short break. I literally have wasted my break singing this song and I didn't like it. Just give me 5 seconds, guys. Okay, let's continue. JSON.stringify. Let's see the JSON.stringify function. A common use of JSON is to exchange data to and from a server. Yes, we know that. When sending data to a web server, the data has to be a string. So when you're sending data to a web server, it has to be a string. Convert a JavaScript object into string with JSON.stringify. Okay. Stringify a JavaScript object. Imagine we have this object in JavaScript, like this. Okay, so you have this object in JavaScript. Use the JavaScript function JSON or stringify to convert it into a string. So just do like create a my JSON variable, and you are doing JSON or stringify object. So the JSON object has come and you are storing it in my JSON. The result will be a string following the JSON notation. Okay, my JSON is now a string. So my JSON is now a string and ready to be sent to a server. Okay, so like here you have an object and then you have a my JSON. So here in this my JSON we have a JSON object, and then if we like show it in demo, then this has gone. This is following the JSON notation, so this is fine. You will learn how to send JSON to a server in next chapter. So we will learn how to send it in the next chapter. Okay, so now we are on stringify a JavaScript array. Similarly, you can stringify a JavaScript array also. It is possible to stringify JavaScript arrays also. Imagine we have this array in JavaScript. So imagine we have this array in JavaScript. Use the JavaScript function JSON or stringify to convert it into a string, into JSON format. Okay, so here in JSON or stringify we have we have a JSON string, okay, a JSON object, okay, and then we are saving it in my JSON. So the result will be a string following the JSON notation. My JSON is now a string and ready to be sent to a server. So here we have an array, okay, and then we are converting it into JSON and saving it in my JSON. Then we are accessing demo and setting its inner HTML to my JSON. Okay, this is an array following the JSON format. You will learn how to send JSON to the server in the next chapter. Okay, exceptions. Stringify dates. In JSON, date objects are not allowed. So in JSON, date objects are not allowed. The JSON.stringify function will convert any dates into strings. So this JSON or stringify function would convert any dates into strings. So it has converted a date into this silly string that is not looking good at all. Okay, so you should not keep dates. Okay, you can convert the string back into a date object at the receiver. Okay, so now you're on stringify functions. In JSON, functions are not allowed as object values. The JSON.stringify function will remove any functions from a JavaScript object, both the key and value. So what would happen? Like here you have an age and its value is a function. Okay, and if you want to convert it into a JSON object, the JSON object would not contain this age key and value pair. Okay, this old object, JavaScript object, would remain the same, but the JSON object would not contain the age and function only. Okay, because there are functions are not allowed as object values. Okay, so stringify would just remove it. Okay, and variable my JSON, we are saving it in my JSON and then we are showing it. So it has just removed that age thing. This can be omitted if you convert your function into strings before running the JSON.stringify function. So if you convert your functions into strings before you run the JSON.stringify function, it would work. So like here you have a JavaScript object, you are converting the function into a string using the toString method. Okay, then you are saving a new object in my JSON and then you are showing it. So it would work. Now, okay, it is working, but this function is a string. You can't call it. Okay. If you send the function using JSON, the function will lose their scope. So it would lose their scope and the receiver would have to use the eval to convert them back into functions. So that we all know. Browser support. The JSON.stringify function is included in JavaScript, ECMScript, and is supported in all major browsers. In Google Chrome, yes. Edge 8.0, Firefox 3.5, Safari 4.0, and Opera 10.0. Now two chapters are left and we will complete them, and let's take a break. Oh, my feet are aching because I've done a lot of physical exercise today. I just want to stand up. Oh, my foot was aching a lot. Okay, they're still aching. Oh, yeah. So JSON object syntax. So in JSON, this is the syntax. So like here you have an object, the name, the key should also be in quotes, and the value should be in double quotes, and the key also should be in double quotes. Okay, if it is an integer value or a number value, it is not compulsory to add it in double quotes, but still you can. But they can't be single quotes in JSON. The keys also always should be in double quotes, and the values more, if they are a string, they should be in double quotes. So JSON objects are surrounded by curly braces. So these JSON objects are surrounded by curly braces, like here and here. JSON objects are written in key value pairs. So they are written in key value pairs. So this is a key, this is a value. Keys must be strings, so they must be strings. And values must be valid JSON data type like string, number, object, array, boolean, or null. Keys and values are separated by a colon. Each key value pair is separated by a comma, and these key value pairs, if the key should be in double quotes, and the value, if it is a string, you have to put it in double quotes. So accessing object values. You can access the object values by using the dot notation. So you all know how to access object values using the dot notation like this. So like here you have a JavaScript object, you are accessing its name property value, and then you are showing X, so John has come, as easy as that. You can also access the object values by using bracket notation. So using bracket notation also you could do it. So like my object, here you have an object, and then you can access the name using the bracket notation like this also. Okay, and then you are just showing it. So this is the same thing. Looping an object. So looping an object. You can loop through object properties by using the foreign loop. So you can loop through object properties using the foreign loop. So here you have an object, name John, age 30, car null. So these are all JSON objects. See, this is a JSON object. This is also a JSON object. Okay, so we are working with JSON object. So if you want to loop through an object properties by using the you can loop through object properties by using the foreign loop. So here you have an object, the keys are in double quotes, and the values are also, if there is a string value, they are also in double quotes. Then you are using the for loop for X in my OBJ. So first X is name, then it is age, then it is car. Okay, and then we are accessing demo, and it's in HTML. We are setting to X. So first name would come, then age would come, then car would come. Okay, plus a BR we are adding, so BR adds a new line. So in a foreign loop, use the bracket notation to access the property values. So if you want to access the property values, you would have to use the bracket notation. You can't use the dot notation because it in dot notation, whatever you give, it takes it as a key. Like it takes it as a key, and X is not a key. Okay, so you would have to use the bracket notation. So now we are on nested JSON objects. Values in a JSON object can be another JSON object also. So like here we have my object, this is a JSON object. In this, name is John, age is 30, and cars. In this cars there is another object. Car 1 is Ford, car 2 is BMW, and car 3 is Fiat. You can access nested JSON objects by using the dot notation or bracket notation. So like this. So like here you are accessing BMW. So like you are using the car2 over here. So this is the dot notation. This is the dot notation with the bracket notation, and the bracket notation is, you could have done in bracket notation you are doing it like horse. Yeah. So this what? What? Oh, I understand this. We don't have to give a dot over here. Yeah. So now it's working. Okay. So if you want to modify values, how can you do it? You can use the dot notation to modify any value in JSON object. Like my object .cars.cars2, we are setting to Mercedes. So now it is, instead of Ford BMW Fiat, we are changing it to Mercedes, and it is Ford Mercedes Fiat. You can also use the bracket notation to modify a value in JSON object. So like this also you could do it. This is a dot notation with a bracket notation. If you wanted to do this with only bracket notation, just remove this dot, give a bracket, give opening quotes, give a closing quote, and just do this. Same thing. Okay. So now if you want to delete object properties, how you can do it? So using the delete keyword to use the delete keyword to delete properties from a JSON object. So if you want to delete a property, you just use the delete keyword. And Ford, you are deleting car2, so you are deleting BMW, Ford and Fiat remain. And we have completed this chapter. We are on arrays, and no break. Let's continue. Okay, I'll just plug my Mac. That would be a break for me. I'll just switch it on. Okay, it is plugged now, and no issues with the battery. So JSON arrays. Arrays as JSON object. So this is an example. So this is how the array should be. So they should always be in double quotes. The values in the array. Okay, if it is a number, it could be a number, but if it is a string, it should be in double quotes. It can't be in single quotes. Arrays in JSON are almost the same as arrays in JavaScript. In JSON, array values must be of type string, number, object, array, boolean, or null. In JavaScript, array values can be all of the above plus any other valid JavaScript expression, including functions, dates, and undefined. So in JSON arrays, it could be string, number, object, array, boolean, or null. But in JavaScript, it could be all of these plus any other valid JavaScript expression like functions, dates, and undefined. So arrays in JSON objects. Okay, so now arrays in JSON objects. Arrays can be values of an object property. So arrays can be a value of an object property. So like here we have a name John, age 30, and cars. There's an array Ford, BMW, Fiat. Okay, accessing array values. So you can access array values by using the index number. So it's like here we have a cars in this, and it is an array. If you want to access Ford, for example, just do my object, give the object name, then the property name, and it's, if you want to access Ford, give 0 because it is the 0th element. If you want to access BMW, give 1 because it is the 4th element, and Fiat, give 2 because it is the 2nd element. Okay, quite cool. Looping through an array. So loop through an array. You can access array values by using a for loop. So you can loop through it using a for loop. like for I in my object.cars, so first it would be Ford, then BMW, then like Fiat. And then what we are doing in this, we are creating a variable x, we are adding the my object.cars and whatever I is. First it is 0, then 1, then 2. Okay, we are adding a br that is a new line, that's why it is giving in new lines. Or you can use a for loop. You could also use a normal for loop. So like for I equals to 0, I is in my object cars dot length I plus plus, and then the same thing that you want to do in the for loop. So first I is 0, then 1, then 2, so on. So nested arrays in JSON object. So nested arrays in JSON object. So values in arrays can also be another array or even another JSON object. So the values in an array can also be another array or another JSON object. So here we have a my object. Then in this there is a car, which is an array. In this there is an object. There are 3 objects, and there are 2 properties in each object. One is a name, that is a standard name, and then there is a models property, which is another array, another nested array. Okay, like Ford's models are Fiesta, Focus, Mustang, and models of BMW are 320, X3, X5, and models of Fiat are 500 and Panda. To access array inside arrays, so to access arrays inside arrays, use a for loop for each array. Okay, so like here you have a for I in my object.cars. So I in my object.cars. Okay, then you are showing x plus equals to, first in this you are giving a h1 tag, and then you are giving the name. So first Ford, then BMW, then Fiat. Okay, and then in this you are nesting a for loop again, and you are doing for j in my object dot cars. So dot cars I. So whatever I is, so first it I is 0, then 1, then 2. Okay, dot models. Okay, so it's models, so we are looping on the models, and then we are doing x plus equals to, so we are adding in x my object dot cars I. So cars I is first, like first it is this object, then this object, then this object, dot models. So first it is this, then this model, then this model, and j. So j is first 0, then 1, then 2, and then it is 0, 1, 2, and this, then it is 0, 1. Okay, so like this we get model. Okay, modify array values. If you want to modify array values, how you can do it? Use the index number to modify an array. So like my object.cars, and then give the index number that you want to modify, and Mercedes for a second. Okay, so this is a normal array. So we are changing BMW to Mercedes. Okay, now delete array items. Use the delete keyword to delete items from an array. So if you want to delete an item, use the delete keyword, and it would be deleted. So like we are deleting BMW, the first element, so it was BMW and it is being deleted. So it is not being shown because it is deleted. And we have completed this. So we have completed this video. So thank you guys. If you like the video, don't forget to smash the like button and share this video with as many people as you can. And if you have not subscribed to my channel yet, kindly do it so that you don't miss any of my videos. Thank you guys. Bye. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep watching my videos. Dab!